What makes political power legitimate? Why should anyone obey a government? And what gives any of us the right to own property, speak freely, or resist authority? These questions are not abstract. They shape debates about taxation, freedom of speech, economic inequality, constitutional limits, and even the legitimacy of elections. And few works have shaped the answers to these questions more profoundly than John Locke's Second Treatise of Government, published in 1690. Although written in the turbulence of 17th-century England, Locke's arguments form the backbone of modern constitutional democracy. When we speak of natural rights, consent of the governed, limited government, or the right of resistance, we are speaking Locke's language, often without realizing it. Today, we will explore why this work still matters, not as a historical artifact, but as a living framework for understanding political legitimacy in our own time. John Locke wrote during one of the most unstable political periods in English history. The 17th century had seen civil war, the execution of a king, republican experiment, restoration of monarchy, and finally the glorious revolution of 1688.
The central question was this: does political authority come from divine right or from the people?
Sir Robert Filmer had argued that kings derived authority from Adam, political power flowing down through patriarchal inheritance. Locke wrote the two treatises largely to dismantle that argument. The first treatise attacks Filmer's theory directly. The second treatise, which concerns us here, offers something more constructive, a new account of the origin, limits, and purposes of civil government. It mattered then because it justified the overthrow of James II and defended the legitimacy of constitutional monarchy under William and Mary. It matters now because it provides the philosophical foundation for liberal constitutionalism across the modern world. The central problem Locke addresses is this: how can political power be legitimate among naturally free and equal individuals? If human beings are born free, by what right does one person rule another? Locke's answer rejects force, inheritance, and divine right. Political power, he argues, is legitimate only when it arises from consent and exists for the protection of natural rights. This shifts the entire basis of politics. Government is no longer the master of the people. It becomes a fiduciary trust, an instrument created for limited purposes. Locke begins not with government, but without it. In the state of nature, individuals are free and equal. They are governed not by arbitrary will, but by natural law, discoverable through reason. This state is not chaos. It is moral order without political hierarchy. However, it has inconveniences. Individuals must judge their own cases. There is no impartial authority. Disputes risk escalating into violence. Civil government emerges not because humans are vicious beyond hope, but because even reasonable people need impartial adjudication. Modern relevance. When we debate the need for courts, neutral institutions, and rule-based systems, we are operating within Locke's framework. Locke argues that individuals possess rights prior to government, chief among them life, liberty, and property. These are not granted by rulers, they are inherent in human beings. Government exists to secure these rights. When it fails, it undermines its own legitimacy. Modern relevance. Constitutional rights, human rights discourse, and limits on state power all trace back to this idea. The presumption that government must justify interference in personal liberty is fundamentally Lockean. Locke's theory of property is revolutionary. The earth is originally given in common, but individuals acquire property by mixing their labor with natural resources. Labor creates entitlement. There are limits. One may appropriate only what one can use without waste, and one must leave enough and as good for others. However, with the invention of money, durable and consensually valued, inequality becomes possible without direct violation of natural law. Modern relevance. Debates about wealth accumulation, capitalism, intellectual property, and economic justice often hinge on Lockean assumptions about labor and entitlement. Political society arises through consent. Individuals agree to form a community and authorize a legislative power. This consent need not be explicit. Locke introduces the idea of tacit consent. By enjoying the benefits of a society, individuals accept its authority. But consent establishes limits. Government is not absolute. It must rule through known laws, applied equally, and directed toward the public good. Modern relevance. Elections, representation, and constitutional limits all presuppose that political power flows upward from the governed, not downward from rulers. Perhaps Locke's most radical claim is that when government violates its trust, when it attempts to destroy or enslave the people, it places itself in a state of war against them. In such cases, the people retain a right to resist. This is not an invitation to instability. Locke argues that people are generally conservative and slow to revolt, but the ultimate sovereignty remains with them. Modern relevance, the idea that legitimacy can be withdrawn, underlies impeachment mechanisms, constitutional amendments, and even peaceful political transitions. Locke's framework shapes contemporary debates in several ways. In politics, the idea that authority must be justified through consent remains foundational. Governments appeal to elections, mandates, and constitutional legitimacy. In economics, Locke's labor theory continues to influence arguments about markets and ownership. The assumption that effort generates entitlement remains powerful. In media and public discourse, appeals to rights dominate conversation. The language of rights, free speech, religious liberty, property rights, comes directly from this tradition. In institutional design, the emphasis on rule of law, separation of powers, and legislative supremacy reflects Locke's suspicion of concentrated power. Even criticisms of modern inequality often use Lockean language, arguing that current arrangements violate the principle of fairness embedded in enough and as good. Locke's framework shapes contemporary debates in several ways. Locke offers a morally serious foundation for political legitimacy. He grounds authority in reason and consent, rather than force. He affirms human equality and limits arbitrary power. His framework explains why law must be general, why rulers must be accountable, and why citizens possess inviolable rights. Some argue Locke underestimates structural inequality. His theory of property may justify vast disparities once money enters the picture. Others question whether tacit consent is truly meaningful. Simply living somewhere may not constitute genuine agreement. Additionally, critics suggest Locke's state of nature is overly optimistic about human rationality. Is he misunderstood? Often, Locke is reduced to a slogan, life, liberty, and property, but his thought is more nuanced. He acknowledges inequality, accepts political obligation, and emphasizes stability. He is neither anarchist nor absolutist. He is architect of limited government. Locke invites us to see government not as destiny, but as design. Political authority is constructed. It rests on trust. It exists for defined purposes, and it remains accountable to those who create it. In an age of polarization, distrust, and institutional strain, returning to first principles may be clarifying. If government exists to secure natural rights, are our institutions fulfilling that role? If consent grounds authority, how meaningful is political participation today? If labor justifies property, how should we think about value in a digital economy? Locke does not provide ready-made answers, but he provides a framework, a way of asking the right questions. And perhaps that is why, more than 3 centuries later, the architecture of freedom he helped design still supports the political world we inhabit.